I'd like to call to order the Middletown City Council special meeting for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. If we could start with a moment of meditation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Skink, will you please call the roll for us?
Mr. Farrell? Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Moon?
Here.
Mr. Muterspaw?
Here.
Mayor Condrey?
Here. I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mr. Farrell. I believe he will be about 15 minutes late, but just in case he runs into any more delays.
Second.
Ms. Skink, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Moon?
Yes.
Mr. Muterspaw?
Yes.
Mayor Condrey?
Yes. Do we have a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents?
So moved.
Second.
We have the special meeting documents.
We do. When I reprinted all the agendas, I think it's at the bottom of the stack. So I have the documents and I will find them. I
Okay.
don't know what I did with them.
Is it legal to file the special meeting documents without signatures?
If you want to wait, I can.
I mean, I'm cool, whatever, I just want to make sure we're doing it. Okay, do we have a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Gank, you please call the roll.
Mr. Moon?
Yes.
Mr. Muterspaw?
Yes.
Mayor Condrey?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to the topic for the special meeting, which is a discussion of the water and sewer rate study, which I anticipate staff will be taking it from here.
Thank you. I'm actually just going to introduce Raftelis. So about a year ago, City Council approved a contract with Raftelis to do a rate study for us. We were just anticipating a lot of large capital needs for water and sewer and hadn't taken a comprehensive look at the water and sewer rates for quite some time. So we've hired them. We've been working with them over the last year, discussing capital needs, revenue requirements, and all that stuff. So they're going to present those results tonight. There's no action on the agenda tonight to vote on this. I think it'll come to council later this year around budget time. So we're just trying to get the information out there so people have time to react to it before it is brought to you guys for voting, and give community members time to process it as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe Crea with Raftelis.
It is. So the big button moves it forward, yeah?
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be with you today. Before I get started, I do want to thank Nikita and the rest of the staff for working with us over the past almost year as we've been working through the study. Couldn't have done it without their help, so it's been great to work with them, and excited to kind of talk with you all about the results, even though rates are not exactly everybody's favorite topic. So today we're going to kind of just introduce ourselves, and then we want to talk to you about the process that we've gone through as part of our rate study, talk about the key drivers for our results, and then kind of also preview those results and recommendations. My colleague Delaney's going to introduce the rate design elements, where we looked at a few different options for how to move the water and sewer rates forward. So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, I know everyone's interested in what our recommendations are going to mean for customers. So we will see a lot of information about typical customer bill impacts, as well as how your rates and charges compare to peer utilities in the region. So we do have all that information. I know you might be eager to ask those questions up front, but we're going to save them to the end to keep your attention with us the whole time. So, yep. Oh, yeah. It just sounds really loud when you're close to it. Okay. Yeah, and as Nikita mentioned, no action will be taken tonight, so just want to inform everybody. Just so you all know, we have not had the chance to talk with you. Raftelis is a national firm. We specialize in doing this exact kind of work for municipal agencies all across the country. We've worked with over 1,200 agencies in the last 5 years. We do usually 400 or 500 different rate studies across the year across our firm. We are the largest group in the country that does this kind of work. And all that just to say, we've tried to bring as much of that expertise and benchmarking elements into our study as a part of this process. Mentioned myself, Joe Crea. I've been with Ref Tellis for 16 years. I'm a vice president with the firm, and I run our Cincinnati office. My colleague Delaney is a manager with Ref Tellis. She's been here over 7 years as well. We both have a lot of experience working with communities in Ohio, throughout the Midwest, and active throughout all the kind of industry associations as well. So what were we trying to accomplish with this study? Y'all are familiar with it, but we wanted to do a few things. The first is to identify the financial objectives that are really going to help us guide our decision-making process. So working with staff to understand what are those financial priorities for how we want to run the water and sewer enterprises. They ought to run like self-sustaining businesses, so we need to have policies that guide our decision-making. Once we've established that, we want to develop a roadmap that's going to kind of create what our future financial sufficiency looks like. So what are the costs, and how are the revenues that we're going to generate going to be able to support those costs? And then finally, key element in this rate study was to look at the rate structure and recommend defensible rates that help support our objectives, as well as achieve a few different objectives for how we price our service to help promote other initiatives, and we'll talk more about those. So financial planning, just kind of in general, what we're trying to do is determine how much revenue we're going to need across the water and sewer enterprises to make sure we're fiscally stable over time. We have to think, across the short term over the next couple of years, but then as Nikita alluded to, we have some major capital projects coming down on both systems, and so we want to plan for the long term. Those are long-term investments, and we need to make sure we have the revenue to support them. So we're going to look at, projection of our operating expenses and projection of our debt service requirements. We want to know how many customers we have, what kind of growth we might anticipate, if at all. And then all of that is balanced by those financial objectives and policies, which include things like our debt service coverage, our capital project financing, making sure we have a good balance between cash and debt, and how much cash reserves we have on hand. So let's take a look. We're going to jump right in at some of the key drivers for the study. So the first one are, our operating expenses. That's the first thing that we pay every month is, we've got to pay salaries. We have to pay for operations and supplies and maintenance. There has been a lot of increase in our operating expenses due to the inflationary situation that we've been in. We all feel it in our home budgets, and it's certainly no different for the utility enterprises. So there's been some substantial increases in the operating expenses over the last few years. Inflation has tempered, which is helpful, but we do anticipate for the next couple of years to still be above sort of that long-term 2.5% consumer price index sort of inflationary number. The other large increase in our operating expenses is part of one of those capital projects, which is dredging the lime pond, and there's an initial expense, and then there's going to be recurring annual costs to maintain that work. So you'll notice on the water chart, which is at the top, there's a new kind of dark blue or teal line, and that is the expense related to dredging that lime facility every year. So that's kind of an incremental cost above what we've been used to spending historically. Outside of that, most of these operating expenses are increasing according to just common inflationary pressure, inflationary increases. And you can see kind of the year-over-year percentage increases on those charts as well. When we think about the capital piece, water and sewer services is such a capital-intensive process. There's pipes and pump stations and treatment plants. Those all cost a lot of money. You've heard there was an asset management plan that was completed for the water system a couple of years ago. They did a detailed inventory of our assets, particularly the treatment plant and the water mains. The consultant engineering firm kind of scored every asset relative to its likelihood of failure, as well as the consequence of what would happen if that asset were to fail. And the highest risk items, you can see them there on the screen, the lime lagoon, which I was mentioning on the prior slide, the raw water transmission main, and the treated water transmission main. So when we look at where we're going to be spending money in our capital program in a few slides, this is going to be some of the key drivers or key elements. Specifically on the water mains, there's over 100 miles of water mains in the system that were categorized as likely or very likely to fail, based on the age of the pipe, what the material is, has that line seen a lot of breaks before. And one thing's important to note, and this is common for a lot of utilities in the Midwest and even in the Northeast, we have old systems. Here at Middletown, the city's average age for the water transmission mains is over 50 years old. And that's why it's important they've got about a 50 to 75-year life cycle. It's important to start reinvesting in that infrastructure. So those three kind of big ones, the Lime Lagoon, again, is a very high-risk item. So you'll see that there's a one-time capital project to remove 50,000 dry tons of lime. That's, I think, over 100 million pounds of lime. So a lot to be done up front, and then that ongoing maintenance to maintain that facility. We're going to start design on the water transmission line this year. And so that project is underway. And water main replacements, you'll see that we're planning to really ramp up the investment in maintaining and replacing those water mains. In addition to that, additional storage and lead service lines will continue to be front of mind for staff, and so we will see costs related to that as well. On the wastewater side, the consent decree is really what's driving a lot of the sewer capital requirements. So 2018, a consent decree was signed with the US EPA. It was for combined sewer overflow controls, and there's two big projects. The first is the downtown CSO storage basin. That's a project that we're getting ready to undertake. It is a large investment. You'll see it coming up in the details. In addition to that is then the Barnett's CSO storage basin, another large project. Will be happening a little further out in the schedule. There's miscellaneous improvements that need to be made at the water reclamation facility. And then like on the water system, our sewer lines are also aging, and so we need to make sure we're continuously rehabbing and replacing those lines that need it. Some of the numbers on the capital side are here on the screen. If we look at the top, this is the water system, and you can see the investments to be made at the water treatment plant. We've got a large project underway right now, and then we've got some other money spent over the next 5 years. But on the water side, the larger bucket of cost is on the distribution system, and that's really ramping up our water main projects over the next 5 years to make sure we're replacing all of those assets and taking care of the raw water main line, the general distribution mains, and then the 2023 that's the Lime Lagoon. Sorry, I forgot to mention that explicitly. We do account for the inflation because these are all in current dollars, so that's when you see the inflation-adjusted capital numbers. We are layering in an additional element just because of the capital construction bid environment right now is not favorable to utilities, and so we are seeing pressure, and as costs continue to rise, we want to make sure we have space for that in our plan. On the wastewater side, you can see the same detail. The big one to call out there is the CSO storage facility, $55 million investment in 2026 that we want to fund through this project. There's also, I believe that's an aeration upgrade in 2026 as well, the other large dollar number. But how are we going to pay for all that? Certainly that's important. You can see here our breakdown between the water and sewer systems. Those water investments are substantial, and right now the best way for us to finance most of those improvements over the next few years is primarily leveraging state revolving fund loans through the Ohio Water Development Authority and also the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund. These programs are very well funded in the state of Ohio. There's lots of advantages to them. There is the opportunity for principal forgiveness and other advantageous terms. We haven't assumed or counted on any of that, but that is a possibility and something that staff will be working to get as much as we can. But what you can see is we're going to borrow for most of those water projects. On the sewer side, we do have the benefit of having some cash reserves available to us now, so we are going to take that money and intentionally use it to fund some of those early on projects to kind of minimize how much we're going to borrow for our program and kind of keep our long-term interest costs down. And as we move through the plan, we're going to be generating cash each year under our proposed rates, and that also helps fund that rate-funded capital that you see there on the sewer side as well. So when we layer those things together, that gives us our total picture of our revenue requirements, or really how much money do we need to bring in to pay all of our bills. We talked about those factors, the operating expenses that are increasing, primarily on the water side with that additional cost for the Lime Lagoon. We've talked about the capital investments that we need to make on both systems, and really think the charts kind of demonstrate year over year what that looks like. The water side with the operating expenses and the additional capital work, substantial increases in that revenue requirement when you look at 24 through 28. Every year is every year is double digits except for 2027. But we're fortunate, and what you'll see in a couple of slides is that the sewer system is in a little bit better shape currently, and so the increases that we're forecasting there in terms of overall revenue needs are much lower and especially stable in the first few years, relatively flat for those first few years before some of that capital investment, the payment on those loans for the $55 million project begins in 2026. So we're going to put all that together. We know where we need to go. What does that mean for our customers? This is a little bit of an illustrative graphic that I think identifies overall where we need to be, which is 5 to 6% annual increases in what a typical customer might pay for water and sewer service over the next 5 years. That funds the capital investments that I just presented, that funds the operating expenses that we presented, and kind of keeps both utilities in a financially stable environment. We're going to talk about the rate design element here, and so what that will do is that will shift kind of the composition between the water and the sewer bills a little bit, but the overall direction of where we're headed is exactly aligned with this graph here. A little bit more detail and perspective on the two systems. So on the water financial plan, this is again our kind of 5-year forecast. In order to maintain financial sufficiency, that large graph is presenting our costs as the bars, and then the revenues that we would propose under our future rates. So revenue has to increase to keep pace with the costs that are increasing. You see if our rates stay where they're at, we will very quickly be underwater in terms of our annual cost requirements. The two charts on the right are keeping track of key metrics that we need to make sure we're aware of. The first is our cash position, that we have healthy reserves. Being an enterprise fund, it's very important that both water and sewer have stable and healthy cash reserves. In case a pipe breaks tomorrow and we need to have funds available to repair it, it's very important to have those reserves. So what you can see there is that we're maintaining healthy balances for the water fund relative to the overall scale of the operations. We're also maintaining appropriate debt service coverage, which is basically how much capacity do we have when we bring in our revenue after we pay our operating expenses, how much of a cushion do we have to pay our debt? And so we want to make sure we have a little bit of cushion in case something happens and revenues go down one year. We've always got plenty of revenue to be able to pay back our bondholders, our loan holders. On the sewer side, the large picture that shows the financial plan is very different. As we saw on the revenue requirements slide, the increases are much less substantial, and so we actually are able to kind of hold our current rates constant for a few years before increasing with some routine inflationary increases later in the period. We do this by leveraging our fund balance. If you look at that fund balance chart, it's well above our target, and then it drops off. And what that is we're using that money, that available cash, to pay for some of our capital projects to help keep the rates as low as possible and also avoid long-term kind of borrowing costs. In the same way, we want to maintain appropriate debt service coverage levels, and you can see we're doing that there. It drops down, and that's when the debt for the $55 million project kind of hits the financial plan, but still well above our target levels for each of the enterprises. I'm going to let Delaney walk through some of the rate design process that we talked about and some of our considerations, and then I'll be back to wrap us up.
Hello. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so as Joe talked about in the financial plan, we are going to, as step number one, look at your current rate structure as a starting point. And I'll pull it up here on the screen in a second, but what we did with staff is we looked at your current rate structure, we talked about things that we liked about it, things that we didn't like about it, and we used that as a springboard to make some changes and make some improvements to that rate structure. Importantly, the proposed rate structure that we'll show you today, that will generate the same amount of revenue as if we were to do across the board rate increases that Joe presented in the financial plan. So this is what we call revenue neutral. We're not, we are generating the same amount of revenue that you saw in that financial plan. So on the screen is our existing water rates. We've got, on the left side here, we've got our fixed charges. It's a minimum charge, which means that included with our fixed charge is 3 CCF of water. That's fairly common in the industry. What it does is provides a really stable source of revenue. 35% of your revenue on the water side is fixed. It's coming in every single month, whether or not people use water. You see that most commonly in industrial heavy communities such as yourselves. I think it makes a lot of sense to have that stable revenue source. And then you'll see that we have fixed charges that vary by meter size. We've got a $12.58 fixed charge for a 5/8 inch meter, and that escalates to $241 per month for a 10 inch meter. And to the right of that is the differential, which means that the charge for a 10 inch meter is 19 times more expensive than the charge for a 5/8 inch meter. You know, just some observations compared to what we see in the industry, that differential is fairly low. Those are fairly low fixed charges for your larger customers. Most often we see those differentials tied to what we call capacity ratios. So a 10 inch meter can actually flow 115 times the amount of water through that 10 inch meter than it could a 5/8 inch meter. So you typically see those fixed charges kind of aligned with those capacity ratios to represent the cost that, you know, the city of Middletown provides that ability and provides the infrastructure to flow that water, whether or not they decide to use it. So on the right side, we have the volumetric rates. We've got a three-tiered declining block rate structure. So that means tier 1 from 4 to 33 is $3.19. Tier 2 is from 34 CCF to 700 CCF. They're actually getting a 19% discount on their water. And then the highest tier, with tier 3, which is consumption above 700, that's a $2.17. That's a 32% discount compared to tier 1. For your very large customers, which trip over the 27,500 CCF mark, they get a considerable discount of 60% for all water above that threshold. So, you know, declining block rate structure, we do see that oftentimes in economic development, industrial heavy communities. What we noted about these tier thresholds and these discounts is that it seems like they are simulating customer class-based tiers. So really in tier 1, the vast majority of those customers are gonna be residential. In tier 2, the vast majority of those are gonna be commercial and industrial. And then tier 3 is really just really your industrial customers. So, okay, that's the water side. For sewer rates, we've got a minimum charge, just like we did on water. We do not escalate by meter size. You typically don't see sewer rates vary by meter size, but so it's just $21.93. That still includes your 3 CCF of water. We've got an infrastructure charge for $2.19 for a total of $24.12. Minimum charge, which includes up to 3 CCF. Again, that provides a fair amount of revenue stability. Again, 35% of your revenue comes from those fixed charges, so that is stable. On the volume side, we see 8 tiers. It's a declining block rate structure just like water, except we see 8 tiers instead of 3, so maybe a little more than we are accustomed to seeing. So we've got tier 1 starting at $7.02, which includes consumption between 4 and 6, and we've got a myriad of tiers leading up to the highest tier, which is consumption above 17,000 CCF, and you'll see that those discounts, for the lower tiers, aren't quite as significant. 7% for tier 2 and 15% for tier 3, and then all the way up to a 72% discount for consumption for those really significant users above 16,667 CCF. So with that as a starting point, we met with staff, we talked about what we liked, what we didn't like, where we'd like to see some improvement, and we identified what we call pricing objectives. This is just, what is important to you as we are creating rates. This is the primary way that we communicate with our customers, so we want to make sure they align with our objectives as a community. So the first objective that we identified was simplicity. Customers should be able to understand how they're being charged. The second was we need to be mindful of customer impacts. We don't want any given customer to experience rate shock or dramatic impacts to their bill. And then lastly, economic development. This is a rates should encourage industrial growth and economic development. We do have a large industrial base, and we want to keep that. So from there, we have derived the following water rates. So on the left-hand side, we've got our fixed charge. We're keeping the minimum charge. We're keeping that 3 CCF of included consumption. Really, the big change we're making here is that we are shifting to use those capacity ratios that I talked about. So aligning those more with industry standards. Those ratios come from the American Water Works Association. I would say those are the most common differentials that we see across the nation. On the volumetric side, so I mentioned before that we had our declining block rate structure simulated customer class-based rates, and through discussion with staff, we just decided instead of simulating customer class-based rates, let's go ahead and introduce rates that vary by customer class. So you'll see that we have a residential class, a commercial class, and those rates are tied together, mostly because they use water in very similar ways. Residential and commercial customers, and we'll show this in a bit, but they use very similar amounts of waters. There's not a whole lot of economies of scale there. So we've got those 2 pegs together. And then tier 3, we've created an industrial class at $2.48. So one thing I'll say there is for those customers in tiers 1 from that use between 4 and 33 CCF, those are the vast majority of your residential customers. That's the vast majority of your commercial customers. They are actually going to be getting a decrease in their volumetric rate from 319 to 309. For residential commercial customers that do trip over the 33 CCF, they will be seeing a slight volumetric rate increase, and then those large customers that use over that 700 CCF threshold, they will have a bit of a rate increase as well. And then those significant users, which are your very large users that use over that 27,500 CCF mark, we have a 10-cent rate increase for those customers. On the sewer side of things, we are keeping the minimum charge, not changing too much, just a slight, I think a 63-cent increase on the fixed charge. But where we see a lot of simplifying is on the volumetric side of things. We go from that 8-tier declining block rate structure to customer class-based rates, residential and commercial. Those are pegged at the same rate, which is at $4.91, and then your industrial class, which is your industrial class, which is $3.47 per CCF. So some observations on our proposed rate design. We've got the residential and commercial rates set so that the customers that previously used up until Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4, they will actually be getting a volumetric rate decrease. So they were paying either $7.02, $6.50, $5.96, or $5.49 before, and now all of their consumption will be billed at $4.91. So they will be certainly the beneficiaries of the rate increase, or I'm sorry, the rate change. Those customers who do use above 33 CCF, commercial customers using above 33 CCF will see a rate increase just depending on how their consumption falls. So on the industrial side, we're pegging that rate to $3.47. We're actually pegging that to what was previously the Tier 7 rate. So those customers, that use between 1 and 7, or Tiers 1 and 7 before, are getting that benefit of that. Now all of their consumption is going to be $3.47, whereas before they were paying more for all of that consumption. And really the most significant rate increase that you'll see here on the screen is the Tier 8, those very large volumetric users who were using above almost 17,000 CCF per month. They will be jumping from the 194 to the 347. So, I know that was a lot of information. I think we're going to walk through customer impacts. This is where kind of the rubber hits the road. We're going to talk about whose bills are going up, whose bills are going down, how much are they going up, and how much are they going down, and really kind of drilling into how our customers are impacted. Okay, so step number 1, we're going to talk about customers, residential customers, commercial customers, industrial, and/or significant user customers. We're going to walk through some scenarios just to demonstrate, who our customers are. Step number 1 is we're going to look at a graph for each one that just shows how much water our customers use. So up on the screen, you'll see a graph demonstrating the cumulative amount of consumption for each level of consumption on a monthly basis. So you'll see that 8% of your residential customers don't have a bill of 0 CCF in a given month. Notably, 47% of your residential bills are 3 CCF or less. So those are the customers that aren't tripping over that 3 CCF of consumption that's included. So they will never be impacted by those volumetric rates. 47% of your bills all of their impacts will just be related to the fixed component. Okay, so first residential example, she's a small a customer with relatively low usage. She uses 2 CCF per month with a standard 5/8 inch meter. Her bill, like I mentioned before, she doesn't trip over that 3 CCF minimum consumption, so her bill goes up by $1.56 per month. That's just the increase related to the minimum charge. The Martin family, they use 5 CCF of water, and still have that 5/8 inch meter. Their bill is actually going down. So they pay a little bit more for that minimum charge, but their volumetric rates are reduced by enough to impact their overall bill, so that they are paying $2.86 less per month. Your larger families that are using 11 CCF of water per month, 95% of residential bills are 11 CCF or less, so not quite as many customers up here at these higher levels, but for the customers that do kind of get further into those higher volumetric uses, we'll see more of that benefit driven by those lower volumetric rates. So their bill will go down by $12.44 per month. Okay, so for our commercial customers, again, wanted to demonstrate who our commercial customers are and how they use water. So you'll see actually 28% of our commercial customers don't have any consumption on their bill. They're getting a zero bill. And 63% of those commercial customers use 3 CCF or less. So they're not even going to be impacted at all by those volumetric rates.
Did you say there's commercial customers who aren't paying for water?
No.
I thought
I'm
that's
sorry.
what you just said.
I may have, and I didn't mean to.
No, I just,
So 28% of our commercial customers have zero consumption. They didn't trip the meter, and they're not paying any. They will pay the fixed charge.
they have zero consumption, they don't use water?
And it may be, Mayor, so we bill on the even units. So if they use, half of a CCF 1 month, it takes 2 months for them to use a full unit of water to kind of register in the water meter. So it's kind of, they'll see 1, and then it'll be 0, then it'll be 1, and then it'll be 0. So that's
Okay. I'm trying to think of a use case where commercial wouldn't have like a toilet, or I don't know.
Seasonal.
Yeah, well, and it's,
Okay.
if you think about like a shoe store, and they may have a bathroom that gets flushed 3 times a day or twice
Okay.
a day. One unit, 1 CCF is 750 gallons, so it takes a lot of flushes to use that.
Got it,
much
okay,
water.
thank you.
So if it's just kind of that kind of instance where if you've just got a bathroom and it's not getting used that much, it'll take a couple months.
There are also, like, for example, at my business location, we've got 3 separate water bills because it was originally 3 separate locations, and there isn't any water usage in one of them because I don't have any running water usage in one of them. We use more water in the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. It's maybe not what you would expect from a commercial customer base. You do have 63% of your bills not being impacted by that volumetric rate. You do see some more consumption as you get above 10 and those higher levels. So there are obviously some commercial customers that use quite a bit more than that. But yeah, so we'll walk through some examples. So our first is a bakery owner. She uses water very similar to a residential customer. She uses 5 CCF per month with a 5/8 inch meter. She's getting that benefit of those lower volumetric rates, so her bill is going down by $2.86. We're showing a bank that actually has a 1.5 inch meter, so a considerable size meter, not being used appropriately. There's only 13 CCF of water flowing through that meter, so it's they do experience that increase. We talked about those capacity ratios going up. Those differentials going up. So that larger base charge, they will experience that rate increase from that. But they do benefit from the lower volumetric rate increase. So overall for them, they would have a bill increase of $32 per month. So this is another customer with a 1.5 inch meter, but they're using that meter maybe a little bit more appropriately. This restaurant uses 9 times the water that we showed in the prior example, but their bill's only going up by $77. They do experience that larger fixed charge from the water differential realignment, but that's a smaller portion of their bill, so their total bill is only going up by $77 a month. Another example of a fairly large meter size relative to consumption. This is a 4 inch meter and only 27 CCF flowing through that meter. So they're getting kind of hit from that larger base charge, and they do their volumetric charge is reducing, but a $260 bill increase for this customer. So this is a hotel, same meter size, being used more, with 957 CCF flowing through it. They do have an increase in that fixed charge, that drives around $287 of that bill increase, and they do use enough water to where their volumetric rate is actually increasing. So they have a bill increase of $1,436 a month. And with that, I will transition to industrial. Well, and as just one thing I'll say on commercial, obviously the bigger size, the bigger portion of your bill that's driven by your meter charge, you'll feel that more from a percentage standpoint on your bill. The vast majority of consumption below 700 CCF, they will get a benefit from a reduced volumetric rate, but as they use more consumption over that 700 mark, so your very large customers with big meters and a lot of usage, they will experience a volumetric increase as well. We think they're few and far between, and anyway, that's all I'll say. So this is the same graph for our industrial customers. You'll see 2 bars this time instead of just the 1. That's just because our larger industrial customers will sometimes use varying amounts of water versus wastewater. They'll use processed water sometimes and won't send all of the flow back to the sewer system. So kind of the same story here as we saw on commercial. A considerable amount of our industrial users using very, very little water. 41% of industrial bills are between 0 and 10 CCF. You know, a good bit more, 64% use 50 CCF or less, still fairly low as we're thinking about who our industrial customers are. And then we do have, you know, a good amount of consumption between, you know, as we get out to the higher levels, between 500 CCF and 5,000. So there are some large customers, but there's also a lot of low volume customers. I really like this slide because it shows, I think, who you guys are as a community. We've got, the graph on the left shows our accounts by customer class. You'll see 91% of our accounts are residential, but only 28% of our consumption is residential. So, and the big drivers there is those industrial customers that don't even make up 1% from an account standpoint, but they make up 54% of your consumption. So some statistics, your top 3 customers, they account for 44% of your water consumption, and your top 10 account for 55% of your water consumption. So as we're talking about the importance of that revenue stability and talking about those fixed charges, those fixed charges, what they do is secure that stable source of revenue. So if, you know, an industry, you know, changes their processes and no longer require that amount of water, you know, it just provides kind of a protection from a revenue standpoint against that. So these are our significant users and how they will be impacted by our proposed rates. We've got 3 examples up on the slide. Those are real customers from our actual billing data, and these are sample bills. These are their average monthly water consumption and average monthly sewer consumption and their actual meter sizes. So you'll see a customer 1 has a 1.5 inch meter. They use a lot of water at around 39,000 CCF of water per month and very, very little sewer. And their bill will go up by $4,000 from $51,000 to roughly $55,000. Customer 2 has a 6 inch meter, a much larger meter. They're using 30,000 CCF of water about, and then sending 23,000 back to the sewer system. Their bill will go from around $134,000 a month to $157,000, so roughly a $23,000 increase. And then customer 3 has a 2 inch meter, uses almost double the water, 66,000, almost 67,000 of water per month, and then 10,000 CCF of sewer, and their bill also will go up by the tune of around $20,000. And I'll say, these customers have, they're big. They're big customers. I think these numbers are maybe a little large. I think a little bit less large if you think about them from a percentage standpoint, but certainly when you think about the scale of their operations and kind of the revenue that they bring and their cost drivers, I think water is a very small portion of that. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass it back to Joe. He's going to put this in a little bit different perspective. You know, we talked about whose bills go up and whose bills go down. I think it's important to consider how these customers would fare under different rates compared to our, you know, pure utilities. So he's going to talk about how y'all compare.
Okay, we'll try to get through this. I know there's probably some questions, so we'll get done so we can save time for that. We always want to look next door and see, you know, how we compare to our neighbors. So we're gonna do that. But please bear in mind that just because someone else's rates may be higher or lower doesn't mean they're better or you know, more poorly run. They may not be investing in their system, or they may have been forced by the EPA to do a whole lot of work. What we've got here are 4 different graphs, all with the same communities, the same regional communities, highlighting the different various usage levels that Delaney talked about. So our small customer that uses 1, our typical customer that uses 3, and then a couple larger customers that use 5 or 9 CCF a month. What you can see is that we have strong fixed charge revenue. That's important for us to maintain stability. Delaney talked about that. And so when you look at the smallest customer that doesn't use a whole lot of water, we're right in the middle of that peer comparison. We're very comparable to everyone in the region. There are some folks that don't charge as much on a fixed basis, but it's important for us to maintain that, and so we're there. But as you increase your usage, our rates are such that we steadily kind of drop down these comparison charts. And so, again, promoting that affordability of service for typical families, you know, you can see that the city of Middletown's cost for water and sewer service for residential customers, and this also applies to commercial customers. Again, their rates are going to be largely the same. They use water largely the same. So that comparison would still hold for the bulk of our residential and commercial customers. Our industrial customers, certainly important. We talked about how big of a piece of our system that they are. We want to be mindful of that. If you are an industrial customer that doesn't use any water and sewer, which sounds like an incongruent thing, but you would pay a little bit more, and that's driven by those fixed charges. And as we change those and align those with the costs of maintaining that infrastructure, we're continue to be in the middle or towards the upper third of that first chart. But when we think about customers that use a lot of water, you quickly see that, you know, getting service from Middletown for water and sewer is a great benefit and bargain for kind of having your facility located in the city. We are either at or very near the bottom on those larger user charts. And then importantly, our significant users, folks that use a whole lot of water, what do they look like? Because, you know, you saw those increases in their bill going up $5,000 or going up $20,000. I certainly couldn't manage an increase like that. But when we take that and we look across all those peers, it is still the most advantageous for them to all be located here in Middletown. There's one exception there for that one customer with the Dayton rate, and that's a Dayton sewer rate. But I don't think it's going to stay that low forever. So, you know, long story short is that even with the proposed changes, the recommended rate structure changes for our largest customers, we've still got sort of the best deal for water and sewer service. So where are we headed from here? You know, we'll take any feedback, obviously, from council. We'll take other feedback that we may hear from the public as kind of this information is spread and shared with the community. We want to begin public outreach and communication efforts, share where we think we're going to head as part of bill inserts or information on our website, social media, and direct outreach to some of those specific customers. Again, we're not taking any action today, but there will be a future action to consider a 5-year plan, and those rates would be effective January 1 of 2024 with the new budget cycle. Again, that's kind of our what we're thinking today, obviously subject to change and subject to y'all's thoughts. So With that, thank you very much for bearing with us. I know that is heavy content. Sorry to start your meeting off with such a numbers-heavy presentation, but open any comments or questions, of course.
What could council or staff be doing as far as recruiting new users? Are there certain types of users we should be looking for which could mitigate future impact? Heavy industrial users or commercial users? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, any new customers, any growth would be beneficial to the systems. We think about all the development that you're seeing in Central Ohio with Intel, something like that. That would be great, but that also creates a challenge to supply 20 million gallons of water a day. So there's a balance. The one thing is that often, as Delaney kind of mentioned, water and sewer for most enterprises isn't a big part of their equation for when they're trying to site different facilities. Some of those tech companies, obviously, they use a lot of water and it is important. But a lot of the growth in the industry, water isn't their ultimate thing. And so I guess I would say there's no one specific. If you can get a large water user, I think that's great. Nikita may kick me if she doesn't, depending on how much capacity they need. But recruiting solely on the basis of water sometimes can be a challenge unless you find one of those niche, facilities and manufacturers.
I think it is nice to see that our rates comparable for the commercial side are attractive to those types of users. I know we've focused a lot on the area out on the other side of the highway as a potential for, industrial R&D tech. So knowing that we, one, have the capacity, and two, have the right rates to attract people to that area is good to know.
I don't have any questions. I just want to, that was a great presentation because I had like several questions and you guys, the presentation was very detailed. So I know you were joking about a numbers presentation, but that's pretty much what the citizens want to hear, the bottom line.
Of course.
They want to hear what it's going to cost, the difference, and I think you guys summed that up pretty well.
Thank you.
So thank you.
I'm guessing none of the top 10 users have been contacted about this yet. Is that right?
Don't.
Okay. Obviously, that's part of the plan, though, for outreach. Okay. Any other questions? The staff had anything they wanted to add? Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for your presentation. We'll probably adjourn this special session, give ourselves a brain break from all the numbers, and come back into session here in about 5 minutes for a normal meeting. Thank you.